It was a quiet night, and the house was completely still. The clock on the wall showed 2 a.m. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, making soft whispers against the windows. Inside the bedroom, a small nightlight cast a warm glow over the crib where a baby slept peacefully. Then out of nowhere, a deep growl echoed through the room. One of the German shepherds, Max, stood near the crib, his ears perked up, his body tense. His eyes were locked on the dark hallway outside the bedroom door. The second dog, Rocky, stood near the window, growling low, his tail stiff and his fur bristling. The sudden noise woke the parents. The father sat up, blinking in confusion. "What is it, boy?" he muttered, rubbing his eyes. The mother turned toward the crib, checking on the baby, who was still fast asleep. But the dogs did not relax. Instead, their growls grew louder. A strange sound echoed through the hallway, faint, almost like soft footsteps. The father stiffened. He reached for his phone, trying to turn on the flashlight. The mother grabbed his arm, her face pale. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. Then something happened that made their blood run cold. The baby monitor, sitting on the nightstand, crackled with static, and for a brief second, a shadow flickered across the screen, tall, unmoving. Max let out a sharp bark, stepping forward aggressively. Rocky crouched low, ready to attack. The father's breath caught in his throat. He stared at the monitor, his hands shaking. "What was that?" the mother whispered, her voice barely audible. They had no idea what they were about to discover, but what they saw froze them. The house was peaceful during the day. The baby played happily in the living room while Max and Rocky lay beside him, their tails wagging lazily. Everything seemed normal, but at night, things started to change. It began with small things. Max would sit by the crib, staring at the door as if expecting something to walk in. Rocky, usually calm, paced around the room, sniffing the air nervously. At first, the parents thought nothing of it. "Maybe they just feel protective," the mother said, brushing off her concern. Then, one night, the baby suddenly started crying at exactly 2 a.m. His wails echoed through the house, loud and urgent. The mother rushed in, picking him up, gently rocking him. "Shh, it's okay," she whispered. But the moment she held him, she noticed something strange. Max and Rocky were standing stiffly in front of the crib, their ears perked, their eyes locked on the hallway. The father, half asleep, rubbed his face. "What's wrong with them?" he muttered. Rocky let out a low whine, stepping back slightly. Max growled deep in his throat, his tail straight as a board. The mother glanced at the baby monitor. Nothing seemed unusual. "It is just a bad dream," she said softly, placing the baby back in his crib. But as soon as she stepped away, the baby started crying again, louder, more desperate. Max barked suddenly, making the parents jump. Rocky's growl deepened, his nose twitching as if he smelled something strange. The air in the room felt heavier, almost colder. The father sighed. "Come on, guys, it is just a quiet night. There's nothing there." He knelt beside Max and stroked his head. "Relax, buddy." But Max did not move. He stayed tense, his eyes glued to the doorway. For the next few nights, the same thing happened. The baby would cry at exactly 2 a.m. The dogs would react, growling, pacing, barking softly. And yet, every time the parents checked, there was nothing there. One night, the mother tried something different. When the baby started crying, she turned on her phone's flashlight and shined it into the hallway. Nothing. Just an empty corridor leading to the living room. "See?" she whispered to herself. "Nothing is wrong." But as she turned to go back inside, Max suddenly lunged toward the door, barking aggressively. His deep barks echoed through the house, waking the father. "What now?" the father groaned, walking into the hallway. He looked around, sighed, then patted Max's head. "You are overreacting, boy." The mother nodded in agreement. They must be sensing something outside, maybe a raccoon or a stray cat. But deep down, a strange feeling lingered in her chest. Something was not right. The dogs knew it, the baby felt it, but the parents ignored the warning, and soon they would regret it. The Johnson family lived in a cozy little house on the edge of town. It was not too big or too small, just perfect for them. The parents, Mark and Emily, had been married for 5 years, and last summer their lives became even more joyful when their baby boy, Noah, was born. Their house was always filled with love and laughter. In the mornings, sunlight streamed through the windows as Emily made breakfast. Mark would sit at the table, sipping coffee, while Noah giggled in his high chair, waving his tiny hands excitedly. But the happiest members of the family were Max and Rocky, their 2 loyal German shepherds. Max, the older one, was calm and wise. Rocky, younger and full of energy, loved to play. Together they were more than just pets. They were protectors, companions, and part of the family. From the moment Noah was born, Max and Rocky had taken their roles seriously. They never left his side. If Noah was in his crib, Max would lie next to it, keeping watch. If Noah played on the floor, Rocky would sit close by, always alert but gentle. The 2 dogs loved their little human, and Noah loved them right back. He would giggle as he reached for their soft fur, and instead of moving away, the dogs would sit patiently, letting his tiny fingers explore their ears and noses. Whenever someone new visited the house, Max and Rocky would immediately stand in front of Noah, their bodies tense. They never barked aggressively, but their message was clear: "We are watching. Do not try anything." But once they saw the visitor was safe, they would wag their tails happily and go back to their usual loving selves. Evenings were the best time in the Johnson house. Mark would sit on the couch, holding Noah in his arms while Emily curled up beside them. Max and Rocky would stretch out on the floor, resting, but still keeping an eye on everything. Sometimes Noah would crawl toward them, and the dogs would patiently let him climb onto their backs as if playing a gentle game. Emily often laughed. "I think Noah believes they are his big fluffy pillows." Mark smiled, watching their son rest his tiny head on Max's side. "Well, they are the best pillows anyone could ask for." Life was perfect. The house felt warm, safe, and full of love. But what the Johnsons did not know was that this peace would not last forever. Their loyal dogs, always watching, always protective, were sensing something. Something unseen, something coming. And soon their perfect little world would be turned upside down. Mark could not shake the feeling that something was not right. Max and Rocky had been acting strangely for nights, and Noah's sudden crying at 2 a.m. only made things more unsettling. "I think we should get a baby monitor," Emily suggested one evening as they sat in the living room. Mark nodded. "Good idea. If there is something bothering the dogs, we need to know." That night, he installed a baby monitor with a camera facing Noah's crib. The device had night vision and sound detection, so they would be able to see and hear everything happening in the baby's room. When they went to bed, everything seemed normal. The house was quiet. Noah was sleeping peacefully in his crib. Max and Rocky were curled up on the floor. Then, at exactly 2 a.m., it happened again. A deep, low growl rumbled through the room. Max stood up first, his ears pointing straight up. Rocky followed, his fur bristling. Both dogs stared at the doorway, unmoving. Noah, as if sensing something, whimpered in his sleep. Within seconds, his whimper turned into a loud, frightened cry. Emily woke up instantly. She sat up in bed, rubbing her eyes. "Again?" she whispered. Mark groggily reached for his phone and opened the baby monitor app. The screen showed a clear, black-and-white image of the nursery. Noah was in his crib, his tiny arms waving as he cried. Max and Rocky stood near the crib, tense and alert. Mark frowned. "I do not see anything," he muttered. Emily leaned in, looking over his shoulder. The hallway behind the crib was empty. Nothing was moving. There was no sign of an intruder, but the dogs would not relax. Suddenly the screen flickered. For a split second, static covered the image, making it hard to see. Then just as quickly the screen cleared again. Mark's heart pounded. "Did you see that?" Emily swallowed hard. "What was that?" Mark rewound the footage and played it back in slow motion. At first, everything looked the same. The baby crying, the dog standing guard. But then they saw it. A shadow. Not a person, not an object. Just a dark, hazy figure. It appeared near the doorway for a fraction of a second before vanishing. It did not move like a normal shadow. It did not stretch or shift. It was just there. Emily's hands tightened around Mark's arm. "Tell me that was just a glitch." Mark's mouth felt dry. I do not know." The baby's cries grew louder, snapping them out of their trance. Emily rushed to the nursery and picked up Noah, holding him close. "It is okay, baby. Mommy is here." Max and Rocky remained on high alert, their eyes still fixed on the empty doorway. Mark stood by the crib staring at the baby monitor screen in his hand. He rewound the footage again, watching the strange shadow appear and disappear. There was no explanation, no reason for it to be there. Something was in their house. And whatever it was watching them. The next night, Mark and Emily felt uneasy as they went to bed. The strange shadow on the baby monitor was still on their minds, but they convinced themselves it had to be a glitch. "It is just our imagination," Mark said, though he was not sure he believed it himself. Emily nodded slowly. "Maybe. But why are the dogs acting so strange?" That night, they left the baby monitor on, watching closely. Max and Rocky stayed near Noah's crib as usual, their ears twitching at the smallest sound. The house was silent, and for a while, nothing happened. Then, at exactly 2 a.m., it began. Rocky let out a sharp, warning bark, making Noah stir in his sleep. Max stood up, his body tense, his tail stiff. Both dogs faced the same spot, the dark corner near the crib. Noah suddenly woke up and started crying. Mark and Emily sat up in bed, their hearts pounding. Mark grabbed his phone and checked the baby monitor. The screen showed Noah in his crib, crying, with Max and Rocky standing protectively in front of him. The corner of the room, where the dogs were staring, looked completely empty. But then the screen flickered again. The static returned, just like the night before. And then something moved. Mark's hands went cold as he stared at the screen. A dark, shadowy figure slowly appeared near the crib. It was not shaped like a person. It was twisted, shifting, almost like a black mist. Emily covered her mouth, her eyes wide with fear. "Oh my God, Mark, what is that?" On the screen, the dogs reacted immediately. Max barked fiercely, his teeth bared. Rocky lunged toward the crib, growling wildly, but the shadow did not move. It stayed there, hovering as if watching Noah. And then Noah stopped crying. Emily gasped, "Noah!" She jumped out of bed and ran to the nursery. Mark followed, his heart racing. When they burst into the room, they saw the dogs still growling at the corner, their bodies shaking with tension. Noah was sitting up in his crib, wide-eyed, looking past his parents, straight at the empty space near the wall. But to Mark and Emily, the room looked completely normal. There was nothing there. Emily picked up Noah, holding him close. "Shh, baby, it is okay," she whispered. but her voice was shaking. Mark hesitated, then slowly turned his phone screen toward the corner. The baby monitor was still on, and the shadow was still there. But this time, it moved. The dark shape shifted slightly, as if turning to face them. Then, slowly, it drifted toward the door. Mark felt frozen in place. Every instinct in his body screamed at him to run, but he could not move. He could not look away. The shadow slipped through the doorway. The hallway light flickered for a brief second, and then it was gone. Rocky let out one final deep growl before whimpering and stepping back. Max stayed in front of the crib, still staring at the door, his ears pinned back. Emily clutched Noah tightly. "Mark!" "What is happening?" Mark swallowed hard, his throat dry. "I do not know." But deep down, he did. Something was in their house, and now it knew that they could see it. Mark and Emily barely slept that night. Every sound in the house made them jump. The baby monitor footage replayed in their minds over and over, the shadowy figure, the way it moved, how Noah suddenly stopped crying. Something was in their house. By morning, Mark had made up his mind. "We need to check every inch of this house," he said firmly. "There has to be an explanation." Emily nodded, holding Noah close. Max and Rocky were still on edge, following her protectively as she walked around. "I just want to know what we are dealing with." They started with the nursery. Mark searched the walls, the windows, and the closet. Everything looked normal, but when he moved toward the ceiling, something caught his eye. A small wooden door, half hidden in the shadows. It was an attic door. Emily frowned. "I have never noticed that before." Mark grabbed a chair and carefully reached up, pulling the string that hung from the door. As he did, a set of old wooden steps unfolded, leading up into darkness. A strange, musty smell drifted down. Max and Rocky growled low, their ears pinned back. Mark's stomach twisted. He turned on his phone's flashlight and took a deep breath. "Stay down here with Noah," he told Emily. "I will check it out." Emily hesitated, then nodded. "Be careful." Mark climbed the steps slowly. The air was thick and stale. Dust floated in the light of his flashlight, swirling like tiny ghosts. As he reached the top, he shined the light around the attic. And then he saw it. In the far corner, behind old boxes, was a pile of blankets, empty food wrappers, a small flashlight, and, worst of all, a dirty notebook. Mark's breath caught in his throat. Someone had been living up here. His hands trembled as he reached for the notebook. Flipping it open, he scanned the pages. His heart pounded as he read the scribbled words. "I watch them at night. The baby cries, but I do not want to hurt him. The dogs know I am here. They always know. They do not like me watching." Mark's blood ran cold. This was not a ghost, not a shadow. It was a person. Someone had been sneaking into their home, watching them, watching Noah. He flipped more pages. There were crude drawings, sketches of their house, their rooms, even Noah's crib. Some pages had random sentences scrawled over and over. "I just want to stay. I just want to watch." Mark swallowed hard. His hands shook as he stuffed the notebook into his pocket. He had seen enough. Backing away quickly, he hurried down the attic steps, pulling the door shut behind him. Emily saw his pale face and stiffened. "What is it?" Mark took a shaky breath. "Someone has been living up there." Emily's face went white. She hugged Noah tighter. "What do you mean?" Mark held up the notebook. "I found this. They wrote about watching us, watching Noah." Emily gasped. Tears welled in her eyes. "Oh my God." Max and Rocky barked suddenly, their bodies tense. They rushed toward the hallway, growling fiercely. Mark's stomach dropped. Was the intruder still here? He grabbed his phone and dialed 911. "We need the police, now." Emily's hands trembled as she locked the nursery door behind them. She rocked Noah gently, whispering, "It is okay, baby. You are safe." But in her heart, she knew they had never been safe, and whoever had been watching them might not be gone yet. Mark's hands were shaking as he hung up the phone. The police were on their way, but every second felt like an hour. Max and Rocky were still growling, their ears pinned back as they stood by the back door. They knew something was out there. Emily sat on the couch, clutching Noah tightly. Her face was pale. "Mark, what if he is still close?" Mark grabbed the baseball bat he kept by the door. "Then we will not let him get back in," he said firmly. But deep down, his stomach was in knots. Just then, Max let out a sharp bark and ran toward the sliding glass door leading to the backyard. Rocky followed, his body tense. The dogs sniffed aggressively at the glass, their tails stiff and alert. Mark's heart pounded. He flipped on the backyard lights. Nothing. But the dogs did not stop. Max scratched at the door, letting out a deep, frustrated growl. Rocky's nose was pressed against the bottom, sniffing hard. Mark slowly slid the door open. The cold night air rushed in. The backyard was quiet, except for the rustling of trees in the distance. Then, footprints. In the damp soil near the patio, Mark saw them, fresh footprints leading away from the house toward the woods. Emily gasped. He was here. Mark swallowed hard. Maybe he still is. Max and Rocky did not hesitate. As soon as Mark stepped outside, they bolted forward, sniffing the ground wildly. They followed the footprints, leading toward the thick trees at the edge of the property. Mark's pulse raced. He could hear sirens in the distance. The police were coming, but he could not just stand there. Carefully, he followed the dogs, gripping the bat tightly. His breath came in short, nervous gasps as he stepped closer to the woods. The trees loomed tall and dark, their branches swaying slightly in the wind. Then Max barked, loud. Rocky snarled, lunging toward a cluster of bushes. The sudden noise made Mark jump. Then he heard it, a rustling sound. Someone was there, hiding, watching. Mark's grip tightened on the bat. "Come out!" he shouted. Silence. Max barked again, his whole body rigid. Rocky bared his teeth, his eyes locked on the bushes. Then, movement. The bushes shook, a shadow shifted, and then a man bolted out, running. Mark's stomach lurched. "Hey!" He ran forward, but the man was fast. Max and Rocky did not wait for orders. They charged. The man barely made it a few steps before Max lunged at his leg, teeth sinking into his jeans. The intruder yelped, stumbling. Rocky jumped up, growling, blocking his path. "Get off me!" the man screamed, flailing wildly. But the dogs did not back down. Flashlights beamed through the trees as police officers rushed onto the scene. "Stop right there!" The man froze. Max still had his teeth locked onto his leg, growling low. Rocky stood next to him, eyes locked on the stranger, ready to attack again if needed. Two officers tackled the intruder to the ground, yanking his arms behind his back. "You are under arrest," one shouted. Mark exhaled shakily, his heart still racing. He stepped closer, finally getting a good look at the man. He was thin, dirty, with wild eyes and unkempt hair. He looked like he had not bathed in weeks. One of the officers pulled something from the man's pocket, a knife. Mark's blood went cold. The officer turned to him. "You are lucky those dogs were here." Emily rushed outside, holding Noah close. "Did they catch him?" Mark nodded, his throat dry. "Yeah, they caught him." She looked at Max and Rocky, who were panting but still standing guard. Tears welled in her eyes as she whispered, "They saved us." The police took the man away, but Mark and Emily knew things would never be the same. Their home, once safe and warm, had been invaded. But they were safe. Noah was safe. And it was all because of two brave German shepherds who had never stopped protecting their family. The night felt unreal. The flashing red and blue lights painted the house in eerie colors as the police questioned Mark and Emily. Noah had fallen asleep in Emily's arms, unaware of the terror his family had just endured. Mark rubbed his face, exhaustion weighing on him. "Who is he?" he finally asked the officer. The cop glanced at his notes. "His name is Daniel Finch. He used to live in this house, years ago. He was evicted after falling into debt." Emily's eyes widened. "He lived here?" The officer nodded. "Looks like he never really left. When we searched the attic, we found more than just that notebook. There were keys, old ones that still worked on some of your doors. He must have been coming in and out whenever you were asleep." Mark felt sick. He looked at Emily, who clutched Noah even tighter. "He was in our house while we were here." The officer's face was grim. "We think he has been sneaking in for months, watching, maybe just out of obsession or attachment to the house. But that notebook, the drawings of your son, we do not know what he planned to do." Emily shivered. "Oh my God!" Mark swallowed hard. His gaze fell on Max and Rocky, standing a few feet away. Even after everything, they were still alert, their eyes locked on the police car where Daniel sat, handcuffed in the back seat. They had known all along. Mark turned back to the officer. "If it were not for the dogs, we might never have known." The officer nodded. "You are lucky to have them." After the police left, the house felt strangely silent. The adrenaline had worn off, leaving only exhaustion. Mark and Emily sat on the living room floor, Noah asleep between them. Max and Rocky lay nearby, their ears twitching at every small sound. Emily ran a gentle hand through Max's fur. "They never stopped warning us," she whispered. "We just did not listen." Mark exhaled, guilt creeping in. "I should have paid more attention. I thought they were just acting up." But they knew, they saw what we could not. Rocky let out a soft sigh, resting his head on Mark's lap. Mark smiled slightly and scratched behind his ears. "You saved us, buddy." Max shifted closer to Emily, pressing his head against her leg. Tears welled in her eyes as she kissed his forehead. "Both of you did." The thought of what could have happened made her throat tighten. If the dogs had not been there, if they had ignored their warnings, Noah could have been in danger. Mark reached for his phone, pulling up the baby monitor footage one last time. The shadowy figure was gone now, the nightmare was over. He looked at Max and Rocky again, admiration filling his heart. "Dogs are incredible," he murmured. "They see what we cannot. They protect us even when we do not understand." Emily nodded, stroking Max's fur. "And they love us, even when we do not listen." Max let out a happy huff, his tail thumping softly. Rocky stretched out, finally allowing himself to relax. The fear of that night would stay with them for a long time. But they were safe now. And it was all because of two loyal German shepherds who never stopped fighting for their family. Emily leaned against Mark, exhaustion finally settling in. "They are our heroes." Mark smiled, resting a hand on Rocky's back. "Yeah, they really are." As the first light of morning filtered through the windows, Max and Rocky curled up beside their family, their job done for the night. But even in sleep, their ears remained perked, forever ready to protect the ones they loved.